My name is Jerry Gonzalez. I am Executive Director of the Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials, also known as GALEO. The website is galeo.org, and we're also on Facebook for those of you that are on Facebook. How many of you are on Facebook? I've kind of figured most of you were on Facebook. Facebook.com/galeo.org is in case you want to find some of our activity, join our efforts in what we're doing. What does GALEO do? I want to talk a little bit about what GALEO does. I want to clarify our position on immigration, then talk about how that is relevant to what we're talking about today, Constitution Day. And I'll bring up several different examples associated with that, so that way we can make sure that we can have a good, engaging dialogue here. I do want engagement from you all. Don't think that there is an impolite or rude question to ask. If you have a question, please, I want you to have your question answered, or at least engage in that dialogue with your question. Don't feel like you can't ask me anything. I've been on conservative talk radio, so believe me, I've had my fair share of questions that were not necessarily polite and not necessarily politically correct, but I do cherish making sure that I can answer any questions that you may have, because ultimately there's a lot of misinformation out there about this topic. There's a lot of emotional information about this topic. And as a nation founded on a constitution and the rule of law and policy and how that impacts our everyday lives, we should be able to find some common ground and move forward towards a solution. And ultimately, that's what we're here for. So GALEO focuses on civic engagement and leadership development of the Latino community all across the state. Under civic engagement, we do voter engagement, voter registration, get out the vote, but we also do advocacy. In fact, we're probably more well known across the state for our leading voice for comprehensive immigration reform, and I'll talk about what that means, as well as speaking out against anti-immigrant initiatives that have been proposed and passed and signed into law in this state. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. That's probably how we're most well known, but we do a tremendous amount of work with leadership development. We partner with the University of Georgia's Fanning Institute to conduct and train community leaders on how to be more effective leaders within their own communities. We do it in English and in Spanish. Those are the needs in our community. So fundamentally, we do a significant amount. We've registered over 7,300 voters over the last several years. We have graduated 300 leaders from communities all across this state, and we're going to continue to do that. Latinos are an integral part of Georgia. We are contributing to the development and expansion and the benefit of our state, our city, and we'll continue to do that. So that's a little bit about GALEO. I want to give you a little background and context of who I am, so that way it presents a clearer picture as to maybe how my views on immigration may be shaped. I was born in Laredo, Texas. Laredo, Texas is right on the U.S.-Mexico border. Literally, there's a river that separates, the Rio Grande, separates the United States and Mexico. Across the river is Nuevo Laredo. And you've heard about a lot of the drug violence and drug crimes that's going on. Yeah, a lot of that is happening across the border in Nuevo Laredo. I get daily updates from my family about what's going on in Laredo. So, growing up, I was maybe 10 years old. My grandma lived with my grandfather and my aunt and uncle. They lived on a piece of property that was literally 1 block away from the river. Why is that significant? Well, when I would go over and visit my grandma and grandpa, at night sometimes we would hear the dogs barking. And look out the window, sure enough, there were people coming into this country right there. Literally cross the river, and we're coming into the country right there. So I have a very personal connection to what's happening with regards to immigration and our failed immigration policies. I've seen it growing up as a kid. The reason they were crossing there was because there was a big truck depot where the big trucks that transport goods all across the country. Well, Laredo, Texas is also the largest inland port in the United States of America. There's more commerce that comes through that port between the United States and Mexico than any other port that's an inland port. So there was a lot of commerce traffic. There was a lot of goods being moved through Laredo, Texas. And part of the reason why people would cross where my grandma and grandpa lived, was because the trucks were literally right there. And they would get on the trucks, go undetected, and that's how they would get to other places in this country. Fast forward several years. A couple of years ago, my sister was living in a community near Laredo, Texas, that was also a border community that she was maybe 5 blocks away from the river. So at that time, I'm an adult. I was already in the middle of this debate on immigration. And I wanted to go, people talk about the border. I wanted to go take pictures of the border. I wanted to go take video of the border to let people know, hey, this is not necessarily an abstract thing. This is real, tangible in where I'm from. So I was taking pictures. Well, sure enough, we had 2 Border Patrol trucks. We had 1 helicopter. And we were interrogated to the nth degree because I was taking pictures. I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in this country. My family's U.S. citizens, born in this country too. Yet we were given the 3rd degree. I mean, I'm free to move around where I need to move around. That's the area where I've grown up. But the border's become so militarized that essentially one of the cameras spotted us taking pictures, taking video, and sure enough, they sent in 2 trucks and a helicopter. My mom, she's 68 years old, she was scared completely. Says, "Ay, mijito, what are you doing?" "Hi, my son, what are you doing?" I said, "Nothing, Mom, I'm just taking pictures, taking video." So anyway, I hope that gives you a context. I understand the issues and the challenges associated with the volatile issue of immigration. And I hope that'll present to you a little bit greater context as to how that shapes my views. Now, what is Galeo's position on immigration? Our position on immigration is that it's broken. It's been broken for over 20 years. And let me be very, very clear about this. I want to make sure that you fully understand our position. Galeo opposes illegal immigration. No matter what you may read in the papers or some of the right-wing blogs that you may read, we oppose illegal immigration. How would we want to perpetuate a situation that harms immigrant families? We don't. We want to solve the broken immigration system that we have. We want to move forward with a workable solution that moves our nation forward together, that upholds our values as Americans. That essentially is our position. Position is shared by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I didn't say U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I said U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The U.S. Catholic bishops. Southern Baptist Convention has taken a similar position on this as well, more recently, and they've been more aggressive in promoting a solution, promoting comprehensive immigration reform on moral grounds. So it's a position that's shared by the mainstream of people. Polling indicates that the American public wants the broken system solved. Our politicians are cowardly going away from their responsibility to enact the changes that are necessary. That's the challenge. So that's our position on immigration reform is that we need to do something about the 11 million people that are already here. We're not going to round everybody up and deport them. First of all, that would be morally reprehensible. And second of all, that would cost trillions of dollars that we just don't have. And it would disrupt industries across this country that we really wouldn't want to disrupt. So we're not going to stick our heads in the sand and not do anything about it, right? We need to do something about it. We need to create more legal channels for people to enter the country legally. We need to make sure that we crack down on employers that are exploiting the work that immigrants are providing. They're not coming because they get to come to school, they get welfare, they get health care. All of that is a myth. They're coming for one reason only: work. What has been done to crack down on employers? What has been done to crack down on employers? So when a politician is talking about, we're going to crack down on the illegal immigrants, what are you doing about employers? Is a question that you as a smart, educated student should ask. They're not talking about that because conveniently they want to perpetuate the broken cycle that we have. So we need to do something about those that are here. We need to create legal mechanisms for people to enter here. We need to uphold our values as Americans. Our values of due process, our values of respecting family. Do we respect family in this country? Family values is something that gets tossed around quite a bit. But we're tearing families apart. In fact, President Obama has deported more people than President Bush has in his last year. President Obama has deported more people under the Obama administration that promised change under the last year of the Bush administration. In the last year of the Bush administration, you'll remember there were all kinds of raids going on and very serious enforcement mechanisms taking place. We're tearing families apart. We're impacting the lives of women and children as we're doing this. So uphold family values is another key component of that. So there's other components of it. Yes, we do need to secure our border. Fundamentally, we do. We are a sovereign nation. We should be able to ensure that we can provide a legal mechanism, a humane mechanism for people to enter the country legally and be able to know who is in our country and who is not. For our national security and our sovereignty, we must be able to do that. So I think that those are positions that you necessarily won't find too much disagreement on. It's all the other details associated with immigration reform that there's a lot of controversy about, and we'll talk about some of that. So that's our position on immigration, and I can go more deeply into that, but that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about how this debate and how this current political climate and how that relates to the Constitution. How many of you have heard about the Arizona law and what's happened? You can't avoid it. It's in the news everywhere. I'm glad most of you have heard about it, but I want to talk about that. I think the topic here is Arizona versus the Constitution. Very relevant, because yes, in my opinion, I do believe that Arizona has overstepped a boundary that is reserved for federal government. Arizona wanted to implement an immigration enforcement scheme, and they passed a law that was an immigration enforcement scheme that would have mandated for local law enforcement officials and everyday citizens, really, to enforce federal immigration laws. Why is that a problem? The problem as a federal court, and I'll get to questions afterwards. I'll get to questions afterwards. Let me make my point. The problem is that essentially Arizona wanted to make sure that they were doing this, and if you read the Arizona legislation, and yes, I have read the Arizona legislation, I have read the updated legislation, and I have read the federal court ruling associated with the result of where we are now. So in case any of you were thinking, well, has he read it? Yes, I have read it. I spent the time to read it. But Arizona was really going above and beyond of what the federal government is allowed to do. The federal government does partner with some local law enforcement agencies to try to get a hold of making sure that they can enforce federal immigration laws to those that are committing very serious crimes against our country. And I have no problem with that. I have no problem with making sure that local law enforcement has every tool available for enforcement purposes to remove people that are dealing drugs, to remove people that are committing murders, that are committing rape, that are committing serious crimes against our community. I have no problem with that. But Arizona was going a step further to where any infraction would have led to the asking of paperwork, the asking of proof of citizenship. Immigration is a complex issue. It's a complex issue to enforce. It's a complex issue to regulate. And that is why a federal court ruled that Arizona, for the most part, in most of the provisions that it wanted to implement, it went too far. Does it make sense to any of you? Does it make sense to have 50 different immigration policies in this country? Does it make sense? What would that look like? Well, if I go to Alabama, I'm a U.S. citizen. If I go to Alabama, do I need to bring my passport, but my passport may not be good enough? Do I need to bring my birth certificate? Where is my birth certificate? Or is my social security card good enough? How else, how do you prove right now your citizenship? If you say driver's license, nah, immigrants can get driver's licenses. You can't. Most of you probably cannot prove that you are U.S. citizens right now, today. Most of you are not carrying your birth certificates with you. Most of you are not carrying your naturalization papers with you. Most of you are not carrying your passports with you. Do we really want to be a nation where every time we encounter a law enforcement official, we're going to hear papers, please? Taking history, when was the last time that we had that kind of a fascist regime? Remember? Where was it? Hitler? Nazi Germany? Papers, please. Remember that? That's not the country that I want to live in. I don't want to make sure that we create an environment where local law enforcement are given such unprecedented power to be able to stop anybody for any reason whatsoever in order for us to enforce our immigration laws. We can do it better. We must do it better. And obviously, with the ruling in Arizona, the federal courts are starting to stop some of the nonsense of states stepping into this area of creating immigration schemes of enforcement. Not convinced? Move to Pennsylvania. A recent court ruling, federal court ruling as well, has ruled against Hazleton, Pennsylvania. You may have forgotten about Hazleton, Pennsylvania. It's been in the court system maybe about, I think about maybe 4 or 5 years. Hazleton, Pennsylvania, a local municipality, passed an immigration enforcement scheme also that would have required landlords to determine the legal status of people that were renting. It had some provisions for employers as well. Federal courts, the appeals courts, ruled, Hazleton, you can't do that. You're creating an immigration enforcement scheme, and according to the Constitution, and according to federal courts and Supreme Court precedents, local municipalities cannot engage in creating immigration schemes or immigration enforcement schemes. That is solely the responsibility of the federal government and our U.S. Congress. U.S. Congress has abdicated its responsibility in reflecting our current needs and really ignored this issue of immigration for over 20 years, which is why we are in the situation that we're in right now. We've got 11 million people in this country illegally. About 4 to 5 million of those are children. So where do we go from here? Federal courts are clearly indicating, and this hasn't been determined definitively yet. This will work its way through the federal court process that will ultimately reach the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will have a say on this issue. But fundamentally, what the red flags that the federal courts are raising right now, and conservative judges are raising red flags associated with this, is that states and municipalities cannot engage in creating their own immigration schemes, because it would not make sense for us to have 50 different immigration policies in this country. So how else is this issue touching our Constitution? Maybe some of you have read the AJC recently. I think a couple of days ago, they were talking about the 14th Amendment, reinterpreting the 14th Amendment. How many of you have heard about that debate? 14th Amendment is very, very clear. I have a copy of the Constitution with me right here, okay? I don't want to paraphrase. I want to make sure that you all have the right information. Well, I have it right here, and if you want to look at it, I'll paraphrase for now. But essentially, the 14th Amendment is very, very clear. It says, any person born in the U.S. is a U.S. citizen, period. 14th Amendment does much more than that, but that is the provision that is being debated right now. Some current gubernatorial candidate, Nathan Deal, proposed legislation in Congress to reinterpret that amendment and pass congressional legislation that would require citizenship be given to people that are born in this country only if they can prove legal status or citizenship. So we're moving away from cops asking you for papers to Immigration, Department of Homeland Security catching babies in the nursing, in the maternity ward, catching babies and then checking the status of the parents. Come on. What kind of a nation are we? So I'm going to open it up for questions pretty soon. I'm almost done with my opening remarks, and I do want to engage in dialogue with you all. So I've got you over there and then you over here. What kind of a country are we living in? Does that make sense for us to want to reinterpret the 14th Amendment? Now, I do have to point out the political hypocrisy with those that are supporting the reinterpretation of the 14th Amendment. Those that are supporting the reinterpretation of the 14th Amendment are in some circles called strict constitutionalists. If it's not in the Constitution, you have no right authority to be able to interpret what the Constitution says, to make a new law, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We need to very black and white interpret the U.S. Constitution. That's not my ideology, that's their ideology. That's a very conservative, constitutionalist ideology of how they judge Supreme Court nominees, whether they're strict constitutionalists or not. That's a term that they use. Yet, on this issue, if you read the 14th Amendment, it's in black and white. What is there to interpret? Well, it's not a convenient thing for them, so they're using it as a political fodder during this election season. What would it take to amend the 14th Amendment? Anybody know? What would it take for us to... It would take another... Well, it would take an act of Congress where 2/3 of Congress would have to vote in favor of this change. And then it would need to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. That doesn't sound like an easy process, does it? And for those of you that teach political science, correct me if my numbers are wrong. I think that I got that right. So that's not an easy process. That would take several years to change our U.S. Constitution. So what are these politicians up to? They're using it for political fodder. They're trying to distract you of their abdication of not doing anything about this issue for 20 years by saying, well, let's change the Constitution. Deny those anchor babies is what they call them. Deny those anchor babies citizenship. A study has been recently released by the Migration Policy Institute that said that tinkering with the 14th Amendment would actually increase illegal immigration. Instead of helping solve the problem, it would further exacerbate the problem. These politicians know it, but they don't think that we're going to actually look into it and say, yeah, that sounds good. Let's go for it. No, we need to be smarter about this. We need to be more educated about this. And that's why I think we're here to learn a little bit more about it. I don't expect you to agree with everything that I said. In fact, I would want you not to agree with everything that I said. You are college-educated, smart, intelligent young people that should question and research and develop your own ideas and philosophies about this. But with the understanding that ultimately in a democracy, grounded in our Constitution, grounded in the rule of law, that we need to work towards a common ground towards this to solve the pressing issues and challenges that are facing our country. Immigration is one of those issues that is facing our country right now. It is the leading civil rights issue right now. You're going to see in the next couple of weeks more activity around this issue. Senator Reid has just said that he will move to add the DREAM Act legislation, an act that would legalize the status of many young children, young students, many who may be in this room, that would legalize them so long as they go to college or serve our military. That may be added to the defense authorization bill, defense funding authorization bill next week. So that's going to be in the news. Senator Bob Menendez also indicated just yesterday that he will be introducing legislation soon, with or without Republican support, on comprehensive immigration reform. So there is movement on this. This is an issue that we can't get away from. So at this point, I would like to open it up for questions, and I hope that you understand the direct connection between the U.S. Constitution and immigration policy. The U.S. Constitution says Congress has the authority, the sole authority, to regulate naturalization, to regulate commerce with foreign countries. Look it up in the Constitution. It's there. Federal courts and Supreme Court rulings have also supported this notion that the federal government is the one that's responsible for immigration enforcement and regulating immigration. The problem is they haven't done their job. And as citizens, we need to be concerned about that and make sure that our elected officials don't stick their heads in the sand and wish this problem to go away. So I'll close with that. As educated citizens, I think you need to be engaged in this political debate because we do need to make some good decisions to move our country forward. I'll begin with you over there and then you, if you could state your name and ask your question.
Uniform rule naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States.
Section 8, I think?
Yeah. It's on the iPhone app.
What's your...
What I had for you was, what are your thoughts on the H-1B visa program and similar programs where people are brought in from other countries because we don't have enough trained? Is that part of the problem or what?
Yes, the whole notion, most of the sexy part of the discussion of immigration is what to do about illegal immigration. The comprehensive immigration reform is much more than that. Comprehensive immigration reform really takes a look at what are our needs as a country, and how do we make sure that we position ourselves to compete in a global marketplace to ensure that we have the talent to propel us into that next level of competitiveness in a global marketplace. So H-1B visas are for, and I'm not an immigration attorney, so I'm going to paraphrase what H-1B visas are, but H-1B visas, from what I understand, are visas for highly skilled professionals that come into this country, and an employer has to prove that they've gone through significant effort to try to hire somebody and here in this country with those qualifications. And if they can't hire somebody with those specific skill sets, then they can go through an H-1B process. But H-1Bs, the day they become available, they're gone. There aren't enough H-1B visas available for the needs that we have in this country. In fact, several years ago, Microsoft put itself into this debate very significantly. In fact, they made a strategic decision in their company to move several of its operations, research and development operations, to Canada, because they were sick and tired of trying to work with immigration to bring in the talent to develop new technologies that Microsoft wanted to develop. They said Canada has better laws, so we'll move our operations to Canada. Do we really want to outsource talent like that? There's many foreign students that come into this country to get their education, foreign students. They competitively get here, they get an education here. Some of them want to go back and some of them want to stay. We've educated them. Why would we not want to keep this talent here? Why would we not want to reap the benefits of this human capital in our own country to make our country much more competitive in a global marketplace? So the comprehensive immigration reform does deal with increasing legal channels for people to enter this country and would make it easier for people. But again, that's one piece of legislation there's only one legislation that's been introduced in the House. The Senate has introduced an outline of what they want to do. Senator Bob Menendez committed to actually putting that outline to language before the end of the year. So be looking for that, because that's part of the mix, that's part of the debate, and that's part of what the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is heavily involved in making sure that we can have the pool of talent that we need to import, if we need to import it, to make sure that we can be more competitive as a nation. I have you over here, and then I'll go to you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Saying that you don't believe that the system is faulty.
Yes.
The immigration system is faulty. I agree with that 100%. But I don't exactly understand what it is that you suggest if you think that this Arizona law isn't correct, that a citizen like myself couldn't say that this company, this organization has a lot of illegal immigrants, something needs to be done about it. If me as a citizen, if I can't do that, then what do you suggest be done?
Okay, her question was, you saying Arizona, and I'm going to try to paraphrase your question. You say Arizona is not a good way to go forward, and our immigration system is broken. She recognizes that. But what else are we supposed to do as citizens to try to address the issue of illegal immigrants being here and working at a company, for example?
I'm against the Arizona, against what they're doing in Arizona, because, I believe that there's a proper way to come into the country. I believe that there's a proper way to come into the country, and yes, it's faulty, and maybe we need to do something about that. But at the same point, is it breaking up families when an American citizen commits a crime and has to go to jail, and it's a mother and she has a child? That's also breaking up families. So if you choose to come into the country illegally, then I think that you're taking that risk. But I do think that it should be a little easier to get into the country. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, and let me talk a little bit, and hopefully I'll address this concern. Arizona's law in my opinion, as much as I disagree with it, it is a symptom of frustration. It is a symptom of frustration, and what the polling indicates, 72% of Georgians support an Arizona law. About 65% of Americans support an Arizona law. You ask in the Latino community, those numbers are flipped. Yes, we have a right to be frustrated. We have a right to demand that our elected officials do something. But we have a constitution. We have a constitution that we must work towards. What Arizona could do, what Arizona should do, and what Georgia leaders should do is pressure our congressional leaders to get off their butts and do something about it.
So you're saying start from zero?
No, not start from zero. There is legislation, and the legislation is very specific about who would become legal and who would not become legal. There is a process, and that's Congress's responsibility according to the Constitution. A Constitution, this nation, we're a nation of rule of law. Well, we need to uphold the very foundation of the rule of law, which is our U.S. Constitution, which means that our Congress and our federal government has sole responsibility in regulating this. As citizens, we need to hold our congressional leaders accountable for failing to act on this very important issue. U.S. Senator Johnny Isakson is up for re-election. All of the congressional delegation is up for re-election. They're sticking their hands up in the air and say, we got to secure the border first. That's code word for, I don't want to do anything about it. That's code word for, I don't want to do anything about it. It's too complicated. I don't want to go anywhere near there. So it's them passing the buck year after year after year, saying, I'm not going to do anything until the border's secure. Well, what's the border secure mean? I mean, that's as abstract, and by all stretch of the imagination, the Obama administration has really done more to truly meet the benchmarks that were set for securing the border. He's added more troops to the border. He's deported more. He continues to deport more people than President Bush did. As much as that upsets me, but that's what he's doing to try to demonstrate that he can be a good enforcer too. Yet, they keep moving the goalposts. They're saying, well, enforce the border more, enforce the border more. Well, what does that mean? And as soon as they set parameters, they change the parameters. That's code word for, I'm too lazy to do anything about it. I don't want to do anything about it. And as a citizen, you need to call out elected officials on this because they're abdicating their responsibility to truly do something about this issue.
But those elected officials, for example, I don't know if you've seen the documentary Food Inc. It talks specifically about organizations, huge organizations like Tyson, who employ these illegal immigrants. And they do this, but what they do is they say, okay, well, we're going to make a deal with the cops and we're going to turn in a couple of these people every now and then. Why are we raiding these huge companies and being like, the company is at fault, not the immigrants, the companies?
I'll address that comment, and then I do need to move to the other comment because there's other questions as well. You bring up a very good point, though. What is Georgia's leading industry? What is Georgia's leading industry? I've heard poultry, peaches. It's agriculture. It all falls under agriculture. This state would crawl to its knees if we were to tinker with the agricultural industry. In fact, there were raids several years ago, many years ago, in Vidalia country, in the Onions. Conservative Republican Paul Coverdale, late Paul Coverdale, actually intervened and said, don't enforce the law, let them finish picking the onions first.
I agree they should be here.
So I've recently taken a trip to Vidalia through Leadership Georgia, and we were there. We were in the Vidalia onion packing plant where they pack the onions into these big crates. And essentially, the question was asked, not by me. I was surprised. I was going to ask the question, but it wasn't asked by me. Well, how many of these people are domestic workers, i.e. born here? Looked around, about 98% of the people working in this packing factory were Latino. And the lady said, we don't have domestic workers. We have more work than we can handle right now. In 2010, they had more work than they could handle. But native-born people don't last maybe about a week in the hard labor of packing onions. Our agricultural industry is heavily dependent upon immigrant labor. It's estimated that about nationally, 70% of our agricultural workers are foreign-born. Of that, 40 to 50% are undocumented. So, okay, let's say we pass the Arizona law here in Georgia. Are we okay with scaring off 40 to 50% of our workforce in the largest industry in Georgia?
I know plenty of people looking for jobs.
So, well, if you know plenty of people looking for jobs, tell them to go to Vidalia, Georgia. There's lots of jobs available during picking season. There really are. The poultry industry also needs chicken pluckers too. So, yes, ma'am, your question.
Do you believe how bad our economy is doing and taxes have a lot to do with this issue right now? I mean,
Do I believe how? Here.
you said that Obama deported more people than President Bush, but Obama's dealing with the recession.
You know, President Obama does have a lot of balls in the air. He has this economic recession that he has to deal with. He's got a whole lot of issues that are still before him. He inherited a big pile of mess. And he came into office with this country in a position that it's not seen since the Great Depression. And many of our fundamental issues, healthcare, education, regulation of industries, energy, environmental concerns, immigration is one of those many things. So yes, I understand that the president has and must focus on priorities of the day. Immigration, I would make the case, however, is a significant issue that he must address to ensure that we can have a strong, viable economic recovery. And there's been studies, and you can look up the studies associated with that, that by passing comprehensive immigration reform, that would actually generate a considerable amount in the next 10 years. I think the number is $10 billion of economic activity in this country. So I would push the president and say, by passing comprehensive immigration reform, you would be able to address a fundamental issue, which is the economy. I'll allow, there's a lot of questions here, so I want to make sure that I allow for other questions. So I can see you afterwards, and then I can address other concerns that you may have. Yes, ma'am, in the back, then I'll go to you, sir, and then you.
You think that changing the 14th Amendment would actually exacerbate the problem?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Changing the 14th Amendment would essentially provide for a, let's say, parents, they're pregnant, they go have a baby. One of the parents is undocumented, or let's say for simplicity, both parents are undocumented. That means that the child, even if the child is born here, the child would be undocumented too. So in that scenario, that would further exacerbate the illegal immigration problem, because you're creating a whole class of additionally undocumented people, even though they were born in this country. Like myself, I was born in this country, and my mom was born in this country. But we go back several generations living in a border city. The border has actually moved us. I mean, we haven't moved. The U.S.-Mexico border has actually moved several times through generations. So it would further create more undocumented people in this country, because babies would not be able to claim citizenship. And the reason they're saying that they want to deny citizenship to babies is because they say, well, that's what keeps them, the undocumented parents here. Well, that's not true. Under current immigration law, a parent would be able to petition once the child reaches the age of 21, but the parent would face a 10-year ban, would have to leave the country for 10 years and then ultimately be able to return under that child. So it's when the child reaches age of 31, then maybe if the parent is still alive, that parent would be able to come legally into this country. So it would further exacerbate illegal immigration because you would have more undocumented children in this country, is how that would play itself out. Yes, sir.
It's more than obvious that illegal immigration is a touchy subject in this country. It doesn't look like there's going to be a simple solution to it, but in your mind, what would be the necessary step on the road to recovery for this problem, making everything better for everybody?
Right now, unfortunately, both Democrats and Republicans are using this issue as a political football. And that's why if you're not registered to vote, you need to register and vote. Both parties are using this as a political football. President Obama in his campaign promised during his first year we would have immigration reform. That's long and gone. So what would need to happen is that I think the possibility of the DREAM Act being a down payment on immigration reform is a very real possibility. That may happen next week. The real possibility of comprehensive immigration reform moving in a lame duck session is also a possibility, where politicians that may be out of office come January can vote their conscience rather than their politics to ensure that we can move this issue forward. So there's a lot of possibilities and balls up in the air, and I think this close to the election it's hard to predict what exactly is going to happen. But I think that Bob Menendez and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus have put steps forward in what they see as concrete steps for that happening, and it follows along what I've said. So that's where we are. I think we had you here. There's only one proposal in Congress, and Congressman Luis Gutierrez has 100 co-sponsors in the U.S. House of Representatives for that. So you can look up, it's a pretty intricate, it's a pretty involved legislation. You can take a look at it, but it addresses the values that we talked about. The main values that we would support a piece of legislation is, it has to be workable, has to make sense. It has to uphold our values as Americans, keep families together, due process are part of those values. And it has to be something that moves us forward together as a nation, not something that divides us. So Congressman Gutierrez's bill meets those standards, and we support that bill. We support the DREAM Act that would legalize students in those situations, and we support ag jobs. So there's a number of different provisions that we have, and send me an email, I'll send you more links to some of that as well. Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe, say, the Mexican government's responsibility in our foreign policy and how that impacts the situation?
Great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because immigration is a symptom of the world we're living in. Mexico has failed its people in this situation. People shouldn't have to be forced out of desperation to migrate because they can't find economic opportunities or provide for their families in their own home countries. Mexico has a great responsibility with this as well. And that's part of what we need to, that's where we need to be moving the debate. Yes, immigration reform is an issue that we must be addressing, but fundamentally we need to look at this issue as a international foreign policy issue. We do need to be looking at it to make sure that we can encourage economic prosperity within Latin America, because they're our neighbors. It's our responsibility as a nation to ensure that we can have viable economic prosperity in North America, South America, because it's in our national security and foreign policy interests to make sure that we have a stable, democratic, progressive Western Hemisphere. So yes, foreign policy has a lot to do with it. We're not talking about it from a foreign policy perspective, unfortunately. Mexico has let its people down. But as a nation, we also need to play a role in partnering with Mexico, partnering with other countries to come up with some kind of efforts to to try to spur economic activity there as well, so people aren't desperate enough to leave their own countries as well. So yes, foreign policy is a major issue. Mexico has failed in its responsibility for meeting the needs of its own people, and they need to be held accountable for that as well. So hope that answers your question. I think I had you as a question? Yes, yes, sir. Then I'll get to you. And then
With
you.
the people already here illegally, obviously, deporting and rounding them up is not an option. Like you said, fiscally, in many other situations, that's not a good idea. I did agree with your idea on really hammering the employers that are employing these people. My first question would be, who would enforce that on them? Would it be at a federal level, or could that be, like the State Department of Labor or whatever? And I guess my second question is, with all these people here, what is y'all's position on like granting all of them legal status, or do we, because if we did that, would that not encourage, a bunch of other immigrants to come over here illegally as opposed to coming in here through the proper channels?
Great questions. One was, what are we going to do and how do we enforce against employers? The other one was, would granting legal status further perpetuate an increase in illegal immigration because more people will come here with the prospect of eventually becoming legal? I'll paraphrase your question. First, employers. There is a lot that the federal government can do for cracking down on employers. Part of the proposals that Senator Menendez and at the time Senator Lindsey Graham were talking about back when he supported immigration reform is that there would be a biometric work ID card. That every worker in this country would have to carry a highly, very difficult to forge biometric card that would allow employers to know whether you are legal in this country or not. Now, you start talking about biometric card and a national work card, and people start talking about, from both the left and the right, about this national ID card. And people on the left are opposed to it because of civil liberties concerns. People on the right are opposed to it because it's privacy, invasion of privacy, and putting the federal government in a position to dictate where you can work and when you can't work, et cetera, et cetera. But somewhere in the middle, the federal government does have a responsibility to provide employers with an easy, efficient, and effective manner to determine legal status. And they need to come down on employers that do circumvent those rules and policies. Right now, the Obama administration is actually taking efforts against employers where they send out no match letters. If your Social Security that you've provided doesn't match with the Social Security database, name, address, birth date, et cetera, then that's how the Obama administration is right now, with the tools that they have in place right now, trying to enforce against employers. So that's one way. Now, would granting legal status encourage further illegal immigration? Well, that's part of the debate right now. 1986, under President Reagan, we had amnesty program. And amnesty was, look up the word in the definition, there's a lot of confusion about this out there. Amnesty is a free pass. You collect your $200, you go, and you become a citizen, period. That's what amnesty was. What is being proposed now is not everybody that's here would become legal. You have to pass a criminal background check. There would be conditional status granted to you, but in order to become a citizen, you would have to master English, and you would have to learn about civics to be a more informed citizen as part of the process. So it is more of a process. Would it encourage further illegal immigration? Not if we pass comprehensive immigration reform. Comprehensive immigration reform is also about further securing our border more effectively, more efficiently through the technology that we have. It's further securing the interior by making sure that employers are held accountable to making sure that they're hiring legal workers. So it all works hand in hand, and if we provide greater legal mechanisms for people to enter into this country legally, then ultimately the pressure for illegal immigration would decrease because there would be legal channels for people to enter the country legally. So the Border Patrol can more effectively do their job if you reduce the flow of undocumented immigrants, and they can really track those that are up to no good that are on the border, because there's legal mechanisms for people to enter legally, then they would choose those legal mechanisms. Right now they're hiring a coyote that would transport them into this country, maybe pay $3,000 to $5,000 with all the militarization that's happened in the border and in Arizona. Now the coyotes are charging about $10,000 for being able to smuggle somebody into this country. Oh, and while we're smuggling people into this country, the drug cartels have gotten involved in the human smuggling process. So, by the way, Mr. Immigrant, carry this pouch of drugs, methamphetamine, that is needed in the United States, so we can sell it over there. So, yes, by comprehensive immigration reform, I don't think that it would encourage further illegal immigration. Would it end illegal immigration? I don't think so. We are a strong, vibrant country. There will always be people that want to be a part of this great country. There will always be people around the world that want to seek a better life for themselves and their families. And they may not always fall into those legal channels, but as a nation, we should protect our borders. We have a sovereignty to be able to, we should do that, but we should do it smartly, effectively, to where it spreads enforcement, not just at the border, but at employers and accountable through immigrants as well.